The silver Bentley sliced through coastal fog like a phantom, its engine growling with each curve of Pacific Heights Road. Inside, Ethan Blackwood gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles blanched white, his mind racing faster than the luxury vehicle carrying him away from his father's ultimatum. The merger with Sterling Pharmaceuticals depends on this union, Ethan. The wedding is in December. Consider your future, our future. Victor Blackwood had delivered the news over breakfast with clinical detachment, as if arranging a board meeting, rather than his son's entire life. At 32, Ethan had built the technology division of Blackwood Industries into a billion-dollar enterprise. He'd earned his place, sacrificed personal happiness for corporate success, but marriage to Natalie Sterling, a woman he'd met exactly twice at charity functions, was a step too far. The coastal highway stretched before him, empty in the early morning haze. His desperate plan crystallized with each passing mile marker. A minor accident, temporary confusion, time to breathe, to think, to escape the matrimonial prison his father had constructed. Just ahead, orange construction markers lined the roadside. Perfect. 3 blocks from the construction site, Saltwater Dreams Cafe perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Olivia Dawson wiped down the espresso machine for the 3rd time that morning, her honey-brown hair escaping the messy bun she'd attempted at dawn. At 28, she divided her time between serving overpriced lattes to tech executives and creating paintings that gallery owners deemed too emotional for commercial appeal. "Liv, you're going to wear the chrome off that machine," Dominic called from behind the pastry case. Her best friend and cafe owner had been trying to cheer her up all week after another gallery rejection. "Need to keep busy," she replied, unconsciously touching the small birthmark above her right eyebrow. The nervous habit had developed after her father abandoned their family when she was 12. "If I stop moving, I might actually think about how behind I am on rent." The screech of tires cut through the morning air like a blade. Then came the sickening crunch of metal against concrete, followed by the terrible silence that only trails disaster. Both Olivia and Dominic rushed outside to see a silver Bentley wrapped around a roadside barrier, its hood crumpled like expensive origami. Steam rose from the engine in ghostly tendrils. "Call 911!" Olivia shouted, already sprinting toward the wreckage. Her mother had been an emergency room nurse, and some instincts ran deeper than thought. The driver slumped over the wheel, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple. Even unconscious, his features were striking. Strong jawline, dark brows, lips that seemed sculpted rather than grown. His tailored suit probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Sir, can you hear me?" Olivia gently pressed 2 fingers against his neck, relieved to find a steady pulse. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of stormy seas. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if forgetting his carefully orchestrated deception. "You're okay," she breathed. "Try not to move. Help is coming." Ethan blinked slowly, forcing confusion into his expression. "What happened? Where am I?" The lie fell from his lips with practiced ease, but something unexpected happened as Olivia's concerned gaze met his. A flutter of guilt. She was genuinely worried about him, this stranger with kind eyes and paint-stained fingertips. By the time paramedics arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Ethan maintained his performance, appearing disoriented, while Olivia answered questions about what she'd witnessed. When they loaded him into the ambulance, she surprised herself by asking, "Can I ride along? He shouldn't be alone." At Pacific Memorial Hospital, Dr. Nathaniel Wells examined Ethan with growing puzzlement. "Scans show minimal trauma, but you're presenting signs of temporary amnesia. Can you tell me your name?" Ethan stared blankly. I don't know." That's when Victor Blackwood arrived, a hurricane wrapped in a 3-piece suit, demanding immediate answers and displaying more concern for his corporate heir than his injured son. From her place in the waiting area, Olivia watched the interaction. Through the partially open door, something protective stirring in her chest as she noticed how Ethan's heart rate accelerated whenever his father spoke. She didn't know why she was still there or why she felt so invested in a stranger's welfare. Perhaps it was the momentary connection they'd shared, or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition of someone else trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Whatever the reason, when Victor Blackwood emerged from the room barking orders about transferring Ethan to a private facility, Olivia found herself standing in his path, her voice steadier than she felt. "Excuse me," she said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." 3 months had passed since their first dinner, and Marcus found himself in uncharted territory. What had begun as calculated seduction had evolved into something far more dangerous. Genuine affection that threatened to derail his carefully constructed revenge. Elena's apartment was a small sanctuary of warmth and creativity on the Upper West Side. Books lined every available surface, art supplies cluttered her kitchen table, and the walls displayed her own watercolor paintings alongside reproductions of Renaissance masterpieces. Marcus stood by her window, watching her prepare dinner in the tiny kitchen, her movements graceful and efficient despite the cramped space. "You don't have to keep bringing me groceries," Elena called over her shoulder, stirring something that smelled divine. "I'm perfectly capable of feeding myself." "I know you are," Marcus replied, though they both knew her bank account suggested otherwise. Her mother's medical bills had grown more aggressive lately, and Elena had taken on additional freelance projects that left her exhausted. "I just like taking care of you." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and Marcus felt a familiar pang of guilt. Every kindness he showed her was tainted by his ulterior motives, every gesture of care built on a foundation of lies. But watching Elena's face light up at his words made it impossible to regret them entirely. "Come here," she said softly, turning from the stove. When Marcus approached, she reached up to straighten his tie, her fingers gentle against his chest. "You've been working too hard again. Victoria called 3 times during our walk in the park." Marcus caught her hands in his, marveling at how small and delicate they felt. "Victoria can wait. This is more important." Elena's breath caught as he lifted her hands to his lips, pressing soft kisses to her knuckles. The simple touch sent electricity racing through both of them, and Marcus felt his carefully maintained control beginning to slip. Over the past months, their relationship had progressed with tantalizing slowness. Stolen kisses in museum corridors, intimate conversations that lasted until dawn, moments of tenderness that felt more real than anything Marcus had experienced in years. "Marcus," Elena whispered, her voice breathless as he pulled her closer. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick with unspoken desire. "The food will burn." "Let it burn," he murmured against her ear, feeling her shiver in response. His hands found the small of her back, pulling her against him until no space remained between their bodies. "I've been thinking about you all day." Elena's response was lost as their lips met in a kiss that started gentle and quickly became desperate. 3 months of careful courtship, of restrained touches and meaningful glances, culminated in this moment of pure need. Marcus backed her against the counter, his hands tangling in her hair as Elena's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips, even as his body screamed for more contact, more of her warmth and softness. Elena's answer was to pull his head down for another kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and longing. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed. Later, they lay entwined on her narrow bed, the city lights painting patterns across their skin. Elena traced lazy circles on Marcus's chest, her head nestled in the crook of his shoulder. The intimacy of the moment terrified him, not just the physical connection, but the emotional vulnerability that came with it. "Tell me something you've..." Never told anyone else, Elena murmured, her voice drowsy with contentment. Marcus's chest tightened. The truth sat like acid on his tongue, that he'd orchestrated their meeting, researched her weaknesses, planned her downfall with surgical precision. Instead, he found himself sharing a different truth, one that surprised him with its honesty. "I've never felt safe with anyone before," he said quietly. "Not until you." Elena lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know. Not with me." The tenderness in her voice nearly broke him. Marcus pulled her up for a gentle kiss, pouring all his conflicted emotions into the touch. "What about you? What's your secret?" Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she'd fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm selfish for being happy when my mother is dying. For letting myself fall in love when my world is falling apart." "Hey." Marcus tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Being happy doesn't make you selfish. It makes you human." The irony of his words wasn't lost on him. Here he was, comforting the woman he'd planned to destroy, offering wisdom about humanity while systematically dismantling her life from the shadows. But seeing the relief flood Elena's face, feeling her relax against him in trust and gratitude, Marcus couldn't bring himself to regret this moment of honesty. "I love you," Elena whispered against his chest, the words so soft he might have imagined them. Marcus's heart stopped. In all his careful planning, he'd never considered this possibility, that Elena might fall in love with him just as completely as he was falling for her. The revenge scenario he'd constructed in his mind featured a calculating gold digger, not this brilliant, passionate woman who gave her heart with such devastating sincerity. "Elena," he began, but she was already asleep, her breathing even and peaceful against his skin. Marcus lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling as Elena slept in his arms. Tomorrow, he would have to face Victoria's pointed questions about the timeline of his plan. Tomorrow, he would have to pretend that Elena was still just a pawn in his game of revenge. But tonight, in the darkness of her small apartment, with her body warm and trusting against his, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a different future. One where he was worthy of the love she'd so freely given, one where he wasn't the villain in their story. The proposal should have been the culmination of Marcus's revenge, but as he knelt in the Metropolitan Museum's Renaissance wing, the same gallery where they'd first met, his hands trembled with genuine emotion rather than calculated triumph. "Elena," he began, his voice catching as she turned from the Botticelli they'd discussed on that fateful night 6 months ago. The ring box felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his pocket. "Do you remember what you said about restoration? How sometimes you have to strip away layers of damage to reveal the original beauty underneath." Elena's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Marcus, what are you—" "You restored me," he interrupted, pulling out the vintage sapphire ring he'd chosen specifically for her. Not the gaudy diamond his plan had called for, but something with history and meaning that matched her love for classical beauty. "You saw something in me worth saving when I'd forgotten it existed. Marry me, Elena. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the faith you've shown in me." Tears streamed down Elena's face as she nodded, her hands shaking as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The kiss they shared in front of the Renaissance masterpieces should have tasted like victory. Instead, it tasted like the most beautiful mistake Marcus had ever made. 3 weeks later, James Chen sat across from Marcus in his office, a manila folder between them like a loaded weapon. Marcus's lawyer and oldest friend looked haggard, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled with exhaustion. "I need you to sit down for this," James said quietly. "I am sitting down." "Marcus." James's voice held a gravity that made Marcus's blood run cold. "We found him, Roberto Vasquez." "What do you mean, found him? He's been dead for 12 years. James opened the folder with shaking hands. "Roberto Vasquez has been dead for 12 years. But the man who betrayed you, who sold your designs to Titan Industries, that was Roberto Valencia, different man entirely." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the documents James spread across his desk: birth certificates, business records, photographs. Roberto Valencia, 63, currently serving a 5-year sentence for corporate espionage. A man who looked nothing like the father Elena described with such love and devotion. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, but the evidence was overwhelming. "I researched everything: the name, the connection to Titan Industries. Valencia used multiple aliases during his corporate espionage career. Roberto Vasquez was one of them, but it wasn't his real name." James's voice was gentle but relentless. "Marcus, Elena's father was a high school art teacher who died in a car accident when she was 16. He never had anything to do with your business, with Titan Industries, with any of it." The room spun around Marcus as the full magnitude of his mistake crashed over him. For 6 months, he'd been systematically destroying an innocent woman's life, a woman who loved him with every fiber of her being because of a name. A fucking name. "The financial manipulations," Marcus said hoarsely. "Her mother's insurance, the museum position cuts." "All proceeding as planned," James confirmed grimly. "The shell companies you created are calling in debts, canceling policies, eliminating positions. Elena's world is about to collapse, and she doesn't even know why." Marcus staggered to his feet, pacing to the window that had witnessed so many of his revenge fantasies. Below, the city glittered with indifferent beauty while his world crumbled into ash. "Stop it. Stop all of it. Cancel every order. Reverse every decision." It's not that simple. Some of these processes have been in motion for months. The insurance cancellation went through yesterday. The museum board voted to eliminate her position this morning. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Can we talk tonight? Something strange is happening with Mom's insurance, and I could really use your advice." The innocent trust in her message felt like a knife twisting in his chest. While Elena was turning to him for comfort and guidance, his machinations were the very source of her suffering. "There's more," James said quietly. "The board is asking questions about your recent behavior. Stock prices are down 18% because of the resources you've diverted to this project. If they find out what you've been doing—" "I don't care about the board," Marcus exploded, sweeping the documents off his desk. "I don't care about the stock prices or the company or any of it. I'm going to tell her everything." "Marcus, think about what you're saying. If you confess now, you'll lose everything. Elena, your company, your reputation. And for what? She'll never forgive you anyway." But Marcus was already reaching for his jacket. Elena would be at her mother's apartment now, probably holding Carmen Vasquez's hand while trying to navigate insurance bureaucracy that Marcus himself had created. The irony was so cruel, it made him physically sick. "I have to try," he said. "I can't let her suffer for my mistakes anymore." James caught his arm as he headed for the door. "What if there was another way? What if we could fix everything quietly, make all her problems disappear without her ever knowing what really happened? You could have your happiness and your empire." Marcus stared at his oldest friend, seeing clearly for the first time the moral chasm that separated them. "You think I could build a marriage on that foundation? Live with her every day, knowing what I'd done? I think you could learn to live with the guilt if it meant keeping everything you've worked for." "Then you don't know me at all." The drive to Elena's mother's apartment felt like a journey to his own execution. Marcus had built his empire on calculated risks and strategic thinking. But nothing had prepared him for this moment of complete vulnerability. Every light he passed, every street corner, brought him closer to the woman whose life he'd shattered and whose forgiveness he desperately craved, but didn't deserve. When Elena opened the door, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion, Marcus felt his heart break completely. She looked so small, so overwhelmed, and the knowledge that he was responsible for her pain made it impossible to breathe. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, falling into his arms. "I don't know what's happening, Marcus. Everything's falling apart, and I don't understand why." Marcus held her tightly, memorizing the feeling of her trust, knowing it would be the last time she'd ever turn to him for comfort. Tomorrow, he would tell her everything. Tomorrow, he would face the consequences of his monstrous mistake. But tonight, he would hold her while she cried and pretend that love could conquer the lies that had brought them together. The morning of what should have been their wedding dawned gray and merciless, matching the storm brewing in Marcus's chest. He stood in the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had once defined him. Handmade, Italian suit, Swiss watch, French cufflinks, while his soul felt stripped bare and worthless. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see Central Park spread below like a green promise of peace he would never deserve. In 3 hours, Elena would walk down the aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral in the vintage Valentino gown she'd chosen with such joy. 300 guests would witness what they believed to be the union of two hearts, never knowing they were attending the funeral of a love built on lies. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Can't wait to be your wife. See you at the altar, my love." The simple message destroyed him. After a sleepless night wrestling with his conscience, Marcus had made his decision. He couldn't marry Elena without telling her the truth, even if it meant losing everything he'd ever wanted. St. Patrick's Cathedral was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, its soaring spires and intricate stonework creating an atmosphere of sacred solemnity. White roses and baby's breath adorned every pew, their delicate fragrance mingling with the scent of centuries-old incense. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the marble floors, where Marcus stood waiting. Elena appeared at the cathedral's entrance like a vision from a Renaissance painting. Her dress flowed around her like liquid silk, her grandmother's pearl necklace catching the light at her throat. She was breathtakingly beautiful, radiant with happiness and love, and the sight of her nearly brought Marcus to his knees. But as she walked down the aisle toward him, Marcus couldn't see the bride of his dreams. All he could see was the victim of his calculated cruelty, the innocent woman whose life he'd systematically dismantled for a crime she'd never committed. "Elena," he said when she reached the altar, his voice barely audible over the organ music, "I need to speak with you. Privately." Confusion flickered across her face, but she nodded, allowing him to lead her into the cathedral's small side chapel. The space was intimate and quiet, lit only by votive candles that cast dancing shadows across the stone walls. "Marcus, what's wrong?" Elena asked, her hands finding his face with familiar tenderness. "You look terrified." "I am terrified," he admitted, catching her hands in his and holding them tight. "Elena, there's something I have to tell you before we do this. Something that will change everything between us." Elena's smile faltered. "Whatever it is, we can face it together. That's what marriage means, isn't it?" The faith in her voice nearly broke his resolve. It would be so easy to take her hands, walk back into the cathedral, and speak the vows that would bind them forever. To bury the truth so deep that even he could pretend it had never existed. But looking into Elena's trusting eyes, Marcus knew he couldn't build their future on such poisoned ground. "Our meeting wasn't an accident," he began, his voice rough with emotion. At the museum gala, when I approached you about the Botticelli, I planned it all. I researched you for months, learned about your interests, your background, your vulnerabilities. Elena went very still, her hands growing cold in his. What are you saying? I thought your father had betrayed me years ago, destroyed my first company, cost me everything I'd built. I wanted revenge, and I thought... Marcus's voice cracked. I thought you were connected to the man who wronged me, so I orchestrated our meeting, our courtship, everything. I was going to marry you, then destroy your family financially, make you pay for what I believed your father had done. The color drained from Elena's face as understanding dawned. She pulled her hands away from his as if burned, stumbling backward until she hit the chapel wall. You're telling me, she whispered, that our entire relationship was a lie? That everything we shared, everything I felt, it was all part of some sick game? No. Marcus stepped toward her, desperate to make her understand. It started that way, but Elena, I fell in love with you. Really, truly in love. Every moment we've shared, every conversation, every touch, my feelings were real. Are real. Elena's laugh was broken, bitter. How convenient. The master manipulator discovers he has a heart just in time for the wedding. It wasn't like that. I tried to fight it, tried to stick to the plan, but you changed everything. You made me remember what it felt like to be human, to care about something more than money and power and revenge. And the truth about my father. Elena's voice was steady now, cold as winter. Did you discover he was innocent before or after you decided you loved me? Marcus's silence was answer enough. Elena closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks, and when she opened them again, Marcus saw his death sentence written in their depths. 3 days ago, he said quietly. James found the records 3 days ago. Your father wasn't the man who betrayed me. It was someone else entirely, someone with a similar name. Roberto Valencia, not Roberto Vasquez. Your father was innocent, completely innocent. 3 days? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. You've known for 3 days that you destroyed an innocent woman's life? And you said nothing? I wanted to tell you immediately, but I had to figure out how to fix things first. Your mother's insurance, your job at the museum, I've been working around the clock to reverse the damage. The damage? Elena's voice rose, echoing off the chapel walls. Is that what you call it? My mother's cancer treatments were delayed for 2 weeks because of your damage. 2 weeks we'll never get back, time she might not have. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his calculations, all his strategic thinking, he'd reduced Elena's suffering to mere collateral damage. But seeing the anguish in her eyes, understanding the real human cost of his actions, made him realize the true depth of his monstrosity. Elena, please, he begged, reaching for her again. Let me fix this. Let me make it right. I'll do anything. Fix this? Elena backed away from him, her wedding dress rustling like broken wings. You think you can fix this with money? With your connections and power? You can't fix what you've broken, Marcus. You can't fix us. She pulled off her engagement ring with shaking hands, the sapphire catching the candlelight one last time before she placed it on the small altar between them. I loved you, she said simply. I loved you with everything I had, everything I was. I would have followed you anywhere, forgiven you anything, stood by you through every storm. But this, I can't forgive. Not because you planned to hurt me, but because you let me love a ghost. The man I fell in love with doesn't exist, does he? Marcus wanted to protest, to insist that his feelings were real, even if their foundation was false. But looking at Elena's shattered expression, he realized she was right. The man she'd loved, kind, honest, worthy of her devotion, was just another lie in a web of deception he'd woven so skillfully that even he'd been caught in it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words pathetically inadequate. "Elena, I'm so sorry." "So am I," she replied, walking past him toward the chapel door. At the threshold, she paused without looking back. "Tell our guests the wedding is off. Tell them whatever you want. That I was a gold digger, that I got cold feet, that I'm unstable. It doesn't matter anymore. Elena, wait. Goodbye, Marcus." The door closed behind her with a soft finality that echoed through the chapel like a death knell. Marcus stood alone among the flickering candles, surrounded by the sacred atmosphere of a church where he'd just confessed his sins and received the only absolution that mattered. None at all. Outside, 300 guests waited to witness a wedding that would never happen. His phone was already buzzing with calls from Victoria, from board members, from reporters who would smell blood in the water by evening. By tomorrow, his personal catastrophe would be front-page news, his empire crumbling as investors fled and competitors circled like sharks. But none of that mattered now. Nothing mattered except the knowledge that he'd lost the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him, Elena's love, given freely and unconditionally to a man who had never deserved it. Marcus picked up the engagement ring from the altar, its weight somehow both insignificant and crushing. As he walked out of the chapel into the main cathedral, ready to face the wreckage of his own making, he realized that Elena had given him one final gift. She'd shown him exactly who he really was. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Marcus Blackwood sat in a studio apartment in Queens that would have fit inside his former penthouse's walk-in closet. Gone were the Italian suits and handmade shoes, replaced by jeans and a simple, button-down shirt. Gone, too, were the empire, the fortune, and the respect that had once defined him. The fall had been spectacular and swift. News of the called-off wedding had triggered a media-feeding frenzy that revealed every sordid detail of his revenge scheme. Investors fled, board members voted him out, and Blackwood dynamics crumbled under the weight of scandal and Marcus's own neglect. He'd been so obsessed with finding Elena, with undoing the damage he'd caused, that he'd ignored the very real threats to his business empire. But as Marcus sat at his second-hand desk, writing what might be his final letter to Elena, he realized he didn't regret the losses. Money and power were replaceable. Elena's love was not. The private investigator had finally tracked her down after months of searching. Elena had moved to Portland, Oregon, where she worked as a freelance art consultant while caring for her mother, whose cancer was in remission thanks to treatments Marcus had anonymously funded through a medical foundation. Carmen Vasquez would never know that the man who'd nearly destroyed their family was the same one ensuring she received the best possible care. Elena's new life seemed peaceful from the outside. She'd rented a small house with a garden where her mother could sit in the sunshine surrounded by the flowers she'd always loved but never had the energy to tend during her illness. Elena had even started dating someone, a kind-looking man named David, who taught art history at Portland State University. The knowledge that Elena was moving on should have brought Marcus peace. Instead, it felt like dying slowly, one breath at a time. "Dear Elena," he wrote, his handwriting shaky after hours of false starts. "I know I have no right to contact you. No right to intrude on the life you've built after everything I destroyed. But there are things I need you to know. Things I need to say before I disappear from your world forever. The medical foundation that's been covering your mother's treatments, I created it using the last of my assets. Not as another manipulation, not as a way to force you back into my life, but because ensuring her health is the only way I can live with what I've done. The foundation is structured to continue operating indefinitely, regardless of what happens. To me. I know you think everything between us was a lie, and I understand why you believe that. But I need you to know that falling in love with you was the most real thing I've ever experienced. Yes, I orchestrated our meeting for horrible reasons. Yes, I spent months manipulating situations to bring us together, but every conversation we shared, every moment of tenderness, every time I held you in my arms, that was real. You were real. What you made me feel was real. I've lost everything now. My company, my fortune, my reputation. The board voted me out 3 months ago, and the bankruptcy proceedings are nearly complete. I'm telling you this not to gain your sympathy, but to show you that I finally understand what truly matters. I would give up everything again, 1,000 times over, for one more morning waking up beside you. I would choose a life of poverty with your love over an empire built on your hatred. You taught me that love isn't something to be calculated or conquered. It's something to be earned through vulnerability, through honesty, through the courage to be worthy of another person's trust. I failed at that with you, spectacularly and completely. But you changed me, Elena. You made me human again, and even though I've lost you, I'm grateful for that gift. I'm leaving New York tomorrow. I don't know where I'm going yet. Maybe I'll travel, see the world through the eyes you've given me instead of the cold calculation that once drove me. Maybe I'll find a small town somewhere and teach business at a community college. Try to give back instead of always taking. Whatever I do, wherever I go, I'll carry the memory of your love with me like a light in the darkness of what I used to be. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve the chance to ask for it. But I want you to know that loving you, truly loving you, taught me the difference between existing and living. I existed for 32 years before I met you. I only lived during the months when you loved me back. Be happy, Elena. Find someone who deserves the magnificent gift of your heart. Marry someone who sees your worth from the very beginning and never takes it for granted. Have the life you've always dreamed of, the life I robbed you of with my selfish need for revenge. And maybe, sometimes, when you think of the time we shared, remember that somewhere in the world, a broken man is trying to be worthy of the love you once gave him. Forever yours in ways you'll never know. Marcus. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in her Portland garden, holding Marcus's letter with trembling hands. She'd read it 17 times since it arrived, each reading revealing new layers of pain and sincerity that she wasn't sure how to process. David was inside making dinner, humming as he worked. He was a good man, steady, honest, uncomplicated in all the ways Marcus had been twisted and scheming. Dating him should have been easy, healing, exactly what she needed after the catastrophe of her relationship with Marcus. So why did she feel like she was sleepwalking through her life? Elena, David called from the kitchen. Are you coming in? The pasta's almost ready. In a minute, she replied, but made no move toward the house. Instead, she pulled out her phone and did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She searched for Marcus Blackwood online. The results were devastating. Article after article chronicled his complete fall from grace. Blackwood Dynamics had been dissolved, its assets sold to pay creditors. Marcus himself had disappeared from public view entirely, with the last confirmed sighting being at a homeless shelter in the Bronx, where he'd apparently volunteered for several weeks before vanishing again. Elena found herself scrolling through older articles, looking for clues about where he might have gone. A tiny item in a Portland community newsletter caught her eye. Local coffee shop hires former tech CEO as barista. The article was 2 weeks old and included a grainy photo that might or might not have been Marcus behind an espresso machine. Her heart racing, Elena grabbed her car keys. The coffee shop was small and cluttered, filled with mismatched furniture and local artwork. Elena almost didn't recognize the man behind the counter. Marcus had lost weight, his face gaunt and tired, his once perfect hair longer and unkempt. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had first captured her attention at the museum, were exactly the same. He looked up as she approached the counter, and Elena watched every emotion she'd ever seen cross his face in the span of a heartbeat. Shock, hope, love, and devastating resignation. Elena, her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "What are you doing here?" "I got your letter," she said simply. Around them, the normal bustle of the coffee shop continued, but Elena felt like they were alone in the world. "You said you were leaving New York." "I did. I've been traveling, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not Marcus Blackwood, tech mogul. Turns out I make decent coffee." His smile was self-deprecating, but Elena could see the genuine contentment underneath. "How did you find me?" "You're not as invisible as you think." Elena studied his face, looking for traces of the calculating man who'd manipulated her so completely. Instead, she saw exhaustion, humility, and something that looked like peace. "You look different." "I feel different. Working here, meeting real people with real problems, having to earn my daily bread instead of commanding it, it's been educational." Marcus's hands were steady as he wiped down the counter, but Elena could see the slight tremor in his shoulders. "Elena, I meant what I said in the letter. I don't expect anything from you. I'm not here to complicate your life or ask for another chance I don't deserve." "What if I'm here to complicate yours?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Marcus's eyes searched her face desperately, looking for clues to her intentions. "You have a life in Portland," he said, carefully. "Someone who cares about you. You shouldn't throw that away for what? For the man who taught me the difference between loving someone's potential and loving who they actually are?" Elena stepped closer to the counter, close enough to see the flecks of gold in Marcus's dark eyes. "David is a good man. He's safe and kind and everything you weren't when I met you. But he's not you." "Elena, I spent 6 months hating you," she continued, her voice growing stronger. 6 months trying to convince myself that everything we shared was false, that the man I fell in love with never existed. But reading your letter, seeing what you've given up, what you've become, maybe that man did exist. Maybe he was just buried under so much pain and anger that it took losing everything to set him free." Marcus came around the counter then, stopping just close enough that Elena could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I destroyed your life. I manipulated. You, lied to you, nearly cost your mother her life with my selfishness. How can you even look at me, let alone